3, go.
My name is Damien with Volkswagen Auto Works of Pearland, Texas. And 4 or 5 months ago, me and Keaton were talking on Facebook about, doing a hybrid car. We were tossing ideas around what we wanted to do. And, Keaton has a bunch of awesome engines laying around. And originally we were going to do the direct injected V6 in the back of this thing from Audi Q5, and that didn't work out. There was a transmission problem. So we ended up coming up with this. We got the 2002 Audi TT, and it's the all-wheel drive. And we cut the car to pieces, basically. And this is what was left. We took the main floor pan and the trunk floor pan and segmented them. We actually drilled all the holes and all the spot welds out and delaminated it the correct way. And I'll explain how we're going to make that fit, because the initial problems we had was that the floor is about 3 inches wider than the car, and the biggest issue is that the receiving points for the trailing arms for the rear suspension is like 3.5 inches wider than the floor of the scirroco altogether. So not only did we have to narrow the floor pan, but we also had to extend it about 1.5 inches to meet the scirroco. The TT was about 1.5 inches shorter from firewall to the inner seam of the interior floor pan. But it was really close. Really cool thing with the swap is that the frame stubs on the scirroco are really close to what the TT was. So other than motor mounts and reinforcing, our engine bay swap wasn't too big of a deal. I'm not a huge Audi guy, so I'm sure there's a bunch of people that know that you can do a swap like with a butter knife and a piece of bubble gum or something. But for our swap, I cut the whole floor out. From firewall to the A-pillar seam, that whole box is pretty much identical from the TT to this car. The heights, the dash offset, everything worked out pretty well. So we're actually going to be reusing the TT dash in our scirroco build. The dash actually fits perfectly in there. We're going to keep the entire TT center console, the TT seats, the carpet. We'll also be keeping the rear TT fold down seats. And then what I'm going to do is, once all the fabrication's done and everything, I'll get the scirroco door cards, and then I will fiberglass mold the TT plastic work that makes the seats match the contours of the door cards. All work out. I'll fiberglass them in. They'll click right in like the factory Volkswagen clips. So whenever we sell the vehicle, someone needs to work on it, it all comes undone just like the factory Volkswagen stuff. This is my first build going this far into a car. No, I have no idea what I'm doing. This is total guesswork. I'm using hope and dreams to get this to work correctly. So this is the next part we have the issue with, was that we had to narrow the floor. Now originally we were hoping that we could actually just trim the sides off. We've had everyone told us just do it that way. Well, no, you can't do it that way. The floor pan has multiple layers. So not only did we cut, we're going to be cutting the floor about 1.5 inches in, but then I have to cut this piece off and then make a hole and then reshape this whole piece to match up to the new shape of the firewall of the scirroco. I didn't want to cut into the tunnel. I didn't want to lose rigidity. I know that the tunnel means everything to a unibody car. So my plan was not to damage anything to do with the firewall lower structure or with the B-pillar subpars that run across here. So my plan is, when I narrow the floor, that I'm going to cut the floor back, but I'm never going to modify these beams. I'll just trim them back and weld it to there, and then add more panels over it to get more rigidity and stiffness. Back here will actually match up when we get this into the scirroco. Let me show you what we did in here. So why don't you come back or change that? So we took the TT frame, inner frame rails, and we basically undid all the spot welds for the whole TT and got the frame rails out. We already have one tack welded in place, and basically I had to trim off any vertical surface on the TT frame rail was just cut off, and then we made it shaped to fit the scirroco wheel well. The only thing we did to the wheel well was just hammer it back a little bit more flat to try and match up the inner structure support. It's in the almost towards the bottom of the frame. The frame has 3 layers of metal. The bottom piece is what you see, and then there's a middle layer that goes from the vertical rise of the inner frame rail and goes out to the TT outer frame rail that matches up to the pickup point for your lift. So this is really important area. Not only are we going to weld the top area, we'll put another piece over top of that. I have the floor actually cut away so I can weld the inner layer, and it'll be welded to the scirroco. And then I'm going to have 1/4" steel plate also below that. So whenever you put a jack under this car, you won't have to worry about crunching anything, or nothing will get damaged. Come around here. So I've never done this kind of a swap before, so I didn't just want to go and weld it seam to seam, which some people said to go ahead and do, and I just didn't want to do it that way. So I just got 1" square stock and made a little frame on the inside. So not only is this tube stock welded to the seam of the inner frame rail, it's spot welded on the inside. On the bottom, we're going to have panels that can be held here, here. There'll be panels here as well. And then so whenever this frame is welded into the scirroco, it actually, I'm welding the scirroco to the 1x1 frame that I welded right here. So it's actually a lot stiffer. It's not just, you know, thin steel to thin steel. I also plan on having tube stock going from the, there's a box of metal here that's all reinforced for the trailing arm pickup point. I plan on getting some flat stock, reinforcing that metal, and then doing 1" round stock, like an X brace underneath the car, from this trailing arm pickup point to that trailing arm pickup point. So to reinforce the back, once both frame rails are in and everything's squared off, we're using laser plotters and laser levels to square everything off. Right now, the car is level. Everything's been bubble checked. This frame rail has already been welded in and has already been bubble checked front and back. So I know it's going to move around a little bit when we go to weld the floor in. I'm doing the best that I can. Whenever I go to weld the lower panels of the floor pan to the frame stubs, I'm actually welding nuts, the flat plate, to both surfaces, and then using a bolt to contract them together, and then I spot weld it there to put some tension to it so it's just not flopping around. I'm not just matching it up and welding it. I'm overlapping and putting tension as well. Once both are in, I'm going to get this square stock right here and weld from here to the frame that will be in here to try and square off this back and try and reinforce it. Now the factory floor pan does have reinforcements going across, and I will use those. I'm going to grind this down, and whenever I go to put the floor pan in, where I cut will actually overlap and sit right on top of this. So I actually have a lot of room to trim and play. So if you ever do this swap on your own, don't worry about making exact cuts at first. I just kind of thumbed it and cut where I wanted to on these edges right here because I know that I'm going to cut them back anyways. Once both frame stubs are in, everything's squared off and everything's solidly welded in, I'll recheck everything, and then we'll go back and we're going to trim back this metal back even more and make exact square lines on everything. So if you see these lines here, they're not exact. This was not meant to be an exact cut right now. The only exact cuts on these frame rails was the inside mating surface going from the Audi TT inner frame rail to the Scirocco unibody. The inside cuts here are just to get it off the floor, so don't think that this is an exact cut. By this week, we'll have the entire rear suspension squared off and welded in, and by that, we'll then start fabricating our front cradle and squaring it off of our rear. We will not have a dog walking car. As far as the suspension height goes, we raised the unibody floor about 1.25 inches higher into the Scirocco than it was on TT. We wanted to do that because we wanted the car to sit lower, but we didn't want to just lower the suspension. I'm tired of seeing all these kids with Volkswagens and Hondas and like every other car, and they lower it and then they go, oh, I fixed it, you know, I got camber plates. Well, it doesn't really work that well. So our plan was to actually lower the entire unibody further in, or recess it further into the car, so we can have the car lower to the ground and still have full suspension travel, so we can actually drive our car every day without bottoming out and like hitting everything. The only real problem we had was that from strut tower to cradle was like 2.5 inches taller than what the hood would allow in the vehicle, so it'd make the car sit all tall. So what we did is we're actually going to be cutting out the hats. We'll be squaring them off here. Once the cradle's in position there, we're gonna go and get we have another TT here, and we're gonna make jigs, and then we'll jig the hats on the other TT, so when we come to this vehicle, we can make hats from scratch and we already have jigs there in place to make everything weld up. Once all the unibody work fabrication is done, then we'll get a TIG welder, and we have a guy that'll come in here and make a really nice cage for this thing, and he'll reinforce from the hat to the frame stubs to the hat to the 1-inch 4130 chromoly round stock that we're going to have that's going to reinforce the steering rack. When we do the swap, the Mark 1s and the Mark 2s have the steering rack on the unibody structure. Since we're using the TT, the steering rack is now on the lower cradle, so we no longer have to have all the equipment on the firewall, so we'll have a smoother firewall as well. One of the cool things about the swap is we're retaining all OEM functions. The entire interior harness and creature comforts are kept with the Scirocco. All the audio, the AC and heated seats, everything is being transferred over. Also the keyless function. As far as the computer is concerned, it's the factory setup. Since we're using the entire drivetrain, ABS is retained because we have the wheel speed sensors as well, and we'll also retain the ride height sensors as well, so you won't have any trip lights on the dashboard. Whenever we go to sell this vehicle, it is our goal that it'll be a light-free vehicle with no issues. It will run correctly. The engine will be gone through, new belts, it'll have a good turbo on it. No issues when this thing will be sold. It'll be a great car.